In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Yet even amidst the endless carnage and slaughter that defines the 41st millennium, there exist warriors who have not forgotten what it means to be human. They are the Salamanders, the Fireborn, sons of Vulkan, and theirs is a tale of endurance, sacrifice, and an unwavering devotion to the protection of innocent life that sets them apart from all other Space Marine chapters. To understand the Salamanders, one must first understand the world that forged them, a death world of impossible beauty and terrible violence called Nocturne. It is a place where the very earth rebels against those who walk upon it, where mountains breathe fire and the ground itself splits open without warning to swallow entire settlements whole. Nocturne orbits perilously close to its moon, Prometheus, and this celestial dance creates a phenomenon the people of that world call the time of trial, a season of cataclysmic upheaval that reshapes the planet's surface with terrifying regularity. During the time of trial, volcanoes that have slumbered for generations awaken with furious hunger. Rivers of molten rock carve new paths across the ashen plains. Earthquakes shatter cities and topple mountains. The people of Nocturne, hardy souls who have learned to survive in one of the most hostile environments in all the Imperium, retreat to their 7 sanctuary cities, ancient bastions built to withstand the worst that their world can unleash upon them. There they wait, huddled together in communities bound by shared hardship, until the fury passes and they can emerge to rebuild what has been destroyed, knowing all the while that destruction will come again. It is from this crucible of perpetual catastrophe that the Salamanders draw their recruits, young men who have known nothing but struggle from the moment of their birth. The people of Nocturne are not soft. They cannot afford to be. Every child learns early that survival demands constant vigilance, that the earth beneath their feet is never truly stable, that fire can be both life-giving warmth and all-consuming death. These lessons, burned into the very souls of Nocturne's inhabitants, create warriors of exceptional resilience and determination. The sanctuary cities themselves are marvels of engineering and determination, great fortresses built into the bones of mountains or carved from volcanic rock. Hesiod, Themis, Epimethus, Aethon, Skarok, Clymene, and Heliosa. These are the 7 havens where humanity clings to existence on this hostile world. Each city has its own character, its own traditions, yet all share the fundamental understanding that community and cooperation are the only paths to survival. When the time of trial comes, no one faces it alone. The strong protect the weak. The skilled teach the unskilled. Resources are shared according to need rather than hoarded for personal gain. This communal spirit, born of necessity, is the foundation upon which the Salamanders Chapter was built. Unlike many Space Marine chapters who maintain a deliberate distance from ordinary humanity, viewing mortals as lesser beings to be protected but never truly understood, the Salamanders have never forgotten their origins. They walk among the people of Nocturne not as distant demigods, but as sons, brothers, and protectors. A salamander may spend decades away from his homeworld, fighting the enemies of mankind across the breadth of the galaxy, yet he will always return to Nocturne, always reconnect with the community that gave him life, always remember that his purpose is not merely to destroy the enemies of the Imperium, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. This philosophy finds its clearest expression in the Promethean Cult, the system of beliefs and practices that guides every salamander from the moment of his induction into the chapter. The Promethean Cult is named for the great moon Prometheus, but its true inspiration is Vulkan himself, the Primarch who founded the Legion and who shaped it in his own image. The tenets of the cult are deceptively simple: self-reliance,
self-sacrifice,
the protection of human life above all other considerations, the tempering of the soul through hardship and isolation, the mastery of the forge and the flame. In isolation do we find our true strength, the Salamanders say. Through self-sacrifice and endurance beyond all others do we become inviolable. These are the credos of the Promethean Cult. These are their tenets. These are their laws. From the fires of battle are they born. Upon the anvil of war are they tempered. The isolation spoken of in these words is not merely physical separation from others, though that is part of it. When a young aspirant first enters the halls of the Salamanders, he must endure 7 months in the Solatorium, a period of utter solitude during which his body is transformed by the implantation of the gene seed that will remake him as a space marine. During these long months alone, the aspirant must confront himself, must learn to find strength within his own spirit, rather than relying on others, must come to understand that while brotherhood is precious, a warrior must ultimately be capable of standing alone against the darkness. This physical transformation is dramatic and, to outside observers, somewhat disturbing. All Space Marines are altered by the gene seed of their primarchs, their bodies remade into something more than human, something capable of feats that ordinary mortals could never achieve. But the gene seed of Vulkan produces changes that are more visible than most. The salamanders emerge from their transformation with skin as black as coal, not the brown or dark complexion of certain human populations, but a true and absolute black, as if their flesh has been carbonized by the fires of their homeworld. Their eyes glow with an inner fire, burning red like embers in a dying hearth, a feature that can be deeply unsettling to those unfamiliar with the chapter. These changes troubled a young salamander once, a neophyte named dak'ir, who would one day become a sergeant of the 3rd Company. Standing on the Sindara plateau of Nocturne, he posed a question to his captain, Ko'tan Kadai, that spoke to the heart of what it means to be a salamander. The Promethean creed tells us that nothing is above the sanctity of human life, the young warrior said, that we are Vulkan's shield, here to protect the innocent and defend the weak. But when I awoke in the solatorium after 7 months of endurance and solitude, I found I had become a monster. How then can we be our primarch's shield if we look like this? It was a question that many salamanders have asked themselves over the millennia, for their appearance is undeniably fearsome. Children have fled in terror at the sight of them. Fearful civilians have mistaken them for daemons or worse. The very people they are sworn to protect sometimes cannot see past the burning eyes and coal-black skin to recognize the humanity that still beats within. Captain Kadai's answer was simple, yet profound in its simplicity. Because we must, he told his young charge. It is because of what we are that we can be Vulkan's shield. Triumph over adversity, self-sacrifice, and the capacity to endure comes from this. By being less human on the outside, we are made more human inside. The burning core of our righteousness and the belief in our duty and all the Promethean creed comes from within. This answer speaks to a truth that the salamanders understand better than perhaps any other chapter. Appearance is not identity. The monstrous exterior of a fireborn contains a soul devoted to the protection of innocent life. The terrifying visage masks a heart capable of compassion and mercy. The salamanders do not fight merely to destroy the enemies of the Imperium, though destroy them they do, with fire and fury. They fight to protect the helpless, to save the innocent, to ensure that humanity endures not just as a species but as a civilization worthy of endurance. This commitment to humanity manifests in ways both large and small. A salamander will risk his own life to save a single civilian trapped in a war zone. He will delay a tactical objective to evacuate refugees from a burning city. He will stand between the weak and those who would harm them, even when doing so offers no strategic advantage, even when it complicates the mission, even when it costs him dearly. This is not weakness. This is the very essence of what it means to be a son of Vulkan. The physical environment of Nocturne has shaped the salamanders in other ways as well. The extreme heat of their homeworld, with its rivers of lava and volcanic mountains, has given them an exceptional resistance to fire and flame. Where other Space Marines would suffer severe burns, a salamander can walk through an inferno and emerge relatively unscathed. This natural affinity for fire has led the chapter to specialize in flame-based weaponry, the holy Prometheum that burns away the enemies of the Emperor. Flamers, heavy flamers, melter guns, these are the preferred tools of the salamanders, weapons that purify through fire even as they destroy. There is a ritualistic quality to the use of these weapons, a sense that fire is not merely a tactical choice, but a sacred element through which the chapter expresses its deepest beliefs. The flame cleanses, the flame purifies, the flame transforms the impure into ash and makes way for new growth. In the fires of battle are the salamanders born, and through fire do they carry out their sacred duty. The other great skill of the salamanders is their mastery of the forge. Vulkan himself was renowned as a smith without peer, capable of creating weapons and artifacts of incredible power, and his sons have inherited this talent. Every salamander is trained in the art of crafting, learning to work metal and shape ceramite with their own hands. The greatest among them become true masters of the forge, capable of creating weapons that rival the finest work of the Adeptus Mechanicus. This skill is not merely practical but spiritual. The act of forging is itself a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the legacy of Vulkan and with the deeper truths of the Promethean cult. As the smith shapes raw metal into a finished weapon, so too does the salamander shape his own soul through discipline and devotion. The hammer falling on the anvil is like the trials of life, each blow painful yet necessary, each impact shaping something stronger and more refined than what existed before. It is said that a salamander's weapon is an extension of his soul, and this is meant quite literally. Many battle brothers craft their own weapons, pouring not just skill but spiritual energy into the work. These weapons become more than tools of war. They become relics, passed down through generations of warriors, each new bearer adding his own chapter to the weapon's long history. Some of the most sacred artifacts in the chapter's possession are weapons forged by Vulkan himself, items of incredible power that are entrusted only to the most worthy of his sons. The forges of Nocturne burn eternally, fed by the volcanic heat that rises from the depths of the planet. In these great foundries, the salamanders craft not only weapons but also their distinctive armor, each suit customized and personalized by its wearer. Look closely at a salamander's battle plate, and you will see the marks of individual craftsmanship, the small details that set it apart from the standardized equipment of other chapters. Here a scale pattern reminiscent of the great fire drakes that once roamed Nocturne. There a flame motif honoring a fallen brother. Every piece of armor tells a story. Every weapon carries meaning beyond its mere function. The fire drakes themselves deserve special mention, for they were once the apex predators of Nocturne, massive reptilian creatures that embodied the fierce spirit of the planet itself. In the days before Vulkan united the tribes of Nocturne, young men would prove their worth by hunting these beasts, bringing back their hides as proof of their courage and skill. The tradition continues even now, though the fire drakes are far rarer than they once were. A salamander who slays a fire drake in ritual combat earns the right to wear its scaled hide as a cloak, a mark of exceptional honor that sets him apart from his brothers. Beyond the fire drakes, there are the salamanders themselves, the creatures from which the chapter takes its name. These are not the small amphibians known on other worlds, but something far more magnificent, great lizards that thrive in the volcanic heat and breathe actual flame. They are sacred to the people of Nocturne and to the chapter alike, symbols of resilience and adaptation, living proof that life can flourish even in the most hostile environments. The chapter's fortress monastery is not located on Nocturne itself, but on Prometheus, the great moon whose gravitational pull causes such devastation to the planet below. Here, far above the volcanic fury of their homeworld, the salamanders maintain their arsenal, their gene seed repositories, their sacred relics, and their great libraries. Prometheus serves as a constant reminder of the balance between destruction and creation, for the same moon that brings such devastation to Nocturne during the time of trial also provides the stable platform from which the chapter operates. The relationship between the salamanders and the people of Nocturne is unlike that of any other chapter and their recruiting world, where other chapters might take their recruits and never look back, severing all ties to their former lives. The salamanders maintain those connections throughout their long lives. A battle brother may live for centuries, yet he will return to Nocturne regularly, visiting the settlement of his birth, reconnecting with the descendants of his mortal family, walking among the people as a protector and guardian rather than a distant legend. This connection serves multiple purposes. It reminds the salamanders of what they fight for, putting faces and names to the abstract concept of humanity. It maintains the bond between the chapter and its recruiting population, ensuring that the best young warriors of Nocturne aspire to join the Fireborn, and it provides a stability, a grounding in human experience that helps the salamanders resist the spiritual dangers that threaten all space marines, the risk of becoming so detached from humanity that they forget why they fight at all. The rituals of the Promethean cult reinforce these connections and these values. Fire plays a central role in almost all of them, from the branding ceremonies that mark a salamander's advancement through the ranks to the funerary rites that honor the fallen. When a salamander dies, his body is not buried in cold earth but consigned to the flames, returned to the fire from which all sons of Vulkan are symbolically born. The most sacred of these funerary sites is Mount Deathfire, the great volcano at the heart of Nocturne. Within its depths lies a vast cavern built by Master of the Forge Tekel millennia ago under the careful guidance of Vulkan himself. Here, suspended above a lake of molten rock, the bodies of fallen salamanders are placed upon pyre slabs coated in ceramite, then lowered into the lava to be consumed by the eternal fires of Nocturne. It is considered the highest honor to be interred in Mount Deathfire, a final return to the world that gave each warrior life. The ceremony itself is solemn and beautiful in its austerity. Chaplains intone the canticles of immolation as the fallen warrior begins his final journey. Into fire are we born, so unto fire do we return, the gathered salamanders recite, watching as the flames claim their brother. There is grief in this moment, for the salamanders are not so far removed from humanity that they do not mourn their dead. But there is also acceptance, a recognition that death in service to the Emperor and in protection of mankind is the highest end a warrior can achieve. The chaplains of the salamanders hold a special place in the chapter's hierarchy, for they are the keepers of the Promethean Cult, the guardians of tradition and spiritual purity. They wear black armor to distinguish themselves from their green-armored brothers, and their helms are fashioned into skull-faced visages that would terrify any foe. Yet behind these fearsome masks are warriors of deep faith and profound conviction, men who have devoted themselves entirely to maintaining the spiritual health of their brothers. Chief among the symbols carried by salamander chaplains is Vulkan's sigil, a simulacrum of the great hammer wielded by the Primarch himself. This sacred relic has passed down through generations of chaplains, each one adding to its legacy of service. To carry Vulkan's sigil is to bear a heavy responsibility, for the chaplain must embody the values of the Promethean Cult in all things, must guide his brothers not just in battle but in the daily struggle to remain true to their beliefs. Isolationism is a fundamental tenet of the Promethean Creed, and the chaplains embody this perhaps more than any other members of the chapter. They are often distant figures, insular and cold in their personal interactions, yet in battle they transform into something entirely different. A salamander chaplain's barbed zeal becomes a tangible force, as sharp as a blade and as furious as a bolter's voice. His fierce adherence to the Promethean Cult becomes a rallying point for his brothers, dragging victory from the jaws of defeat through sheer force of faith. The belief in isolation may seem contradictory to the salamander's close relationship with the people of Nocturne, but in truth these two aspects of their character complement each other. A salamander must be capable of standing alone, of finding strength within himself when all external supports have been stripped away. Only then can he truly give of himself to others, for a warrior who depends on others for his sense of self will always be limited in what he can offer. The salamanders love humanity, but they do not need humanity's love in return. They protect the innocent not for gratitude or recognition, but because it is right. This independence of spirit extends to the chapter's relationship with the broader Imperium. The salamanders are loyal servants of the Emperor, unwavering in their devotion to the throne of terror, yet they have never been comfortable with some of the Imperium's harsher doctrines. They do not share the contempt for ordinary humans that characterizes some chapters. They do not view civilian casualties as acceptable collateral damage. They will not sacrifice innocent lives for tactical advantage, no matter how significant that advantage might be. This stance has occasionally put them at odds with other Imperial forces, including other Space Marine chapters. The Salamanders have been known to intervene when they believe civilians are being unnecessarily endangered, to countermand orders that would result in avoidable deaths, to prioritize evacuation over strategic objectives. Such actions have earned them criticism from more ruthless commanders who view the Salamanders' concern for human life as a weakness that limits their effectiveness. The Salamanders do not agree. They believe that the protection of humanity is the entire purpose of the Space Marine's existence, that an Imperium that destroys the very people it claims to protect has lost its way. Bad deeds are bad deeds, as one Salamander sergeant once said to a callous captain of another chapter. There is no scale upon which they can be weighed against your victories, no measure that can account for monstrous acts. This moral clarity is one of the Salamander's greatest strengths, for it provides them with a sense of purpose that goes beyond mere military objectives. A Salamander knows why he fights. He fights for the child hiding in the rubble of a bombed-out city. He fights for the mother clutching her baby as the enemy closes in. He fights for every innocent soul who cannot fight for themselves. This knowledge sustains him through the darkest times, through losses that would break lesser warriors, through centuries of endless war. The third company of the Salamanders exemplifies all of these qualities, and their story encompasses both the highest ideals of the chapter and the bitter trials that test those ideals. For many years, the third company was led by Captain Ko'tan Kadai, a warrior who embodied the Promethean spirit in all things. Kadai was beloved by his men, respected by his peers, and feared by his enemies. He led from the front, never asking his warriors to face any danger he would not face himself, and he never forgot that the ultimate purpose of all their fighting was the protection of innocent life. Under Kadai's leadership, the Third Company earned renown across the Imperium. They fought Xenos and heretics, daemons and traitors, always emerging victorious through a combination of tactical skill, individual heroism, and unwavering faith. The company's sergeants were exceptional warriors in their own right, men like the veteran Kelm, the fierce tsu'gan, and the thoughtful dak'ir. Together they formed a brotherhood forged in fire, united by their devotion to the Promethean Cult and to each other. Yet even the strongest brotherhood can be tested, and the Third Company would face trials that would shake it to its very foundations. The death of Ko'tan Kadai would plunge the company into a crisis of faith and leadership, forcing each warrior to confront questions about duty, honor, and the meaning of their sacrifice. But that is a tale for another time, a story of grief and determination, of conflict and eventual renewal. For now, let us remain with the fundamentals, with the essential nature of what it means to be a salamander. They are warriors of fire and forge, sons of a primarch who taught them that strength of arm means nothing without strength of character. They are protectors of the innocent, guardians of humanity who have never forgotten their own origins among the embattled people of Nocturne. They are masters of flame, wielding the sacred element that both destroys and purifies, that ends life and makes way for new beginnings. They are also, in their way, among the most human of all space marines. Despite their terrifying appearance, despite the genetic modifications that have remade their bodies into something far beyond ordinary mortals, the salamanders have retained a connection to humanity that many of their brother chapters have lost. They feel compassion, they know mercy, they understand that the galaxy is full of people who are not warriors, who cannot defend themselves, who need someone to stand between them and the darkness. This is the role the salamanders have chosen for themselves. They are Vulkan's shield, standing eternal guard over the people of the Imperium. They are the Fireborn, tempered in the flames of their volcanic homeworld and hardened by centuries of endless war. They are the sons of Nocturne, and they will never abandon their duty to protect the innocent, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how dark the galaxy becomes. The people of Nocturne understand this, which is why they send their best and brightest to join the chapter, why mothers take pride in sons who may never return, why the 7 sanctuary cities continue to support the salamanders even when the time of trial threatens to destroy them all. They know that their sons have become something greater than mortal men, weapons in the eternal war against the darkness, yet weapons that have not lost their souls in the forging. On worlds throughout the Imperium, civilians have looked up to see green-armored giants descending from the sky and felt not terror but hope. They have watched the salamanders charge into battle against impossible odds and known that someone, finally, cares whether they live or die. They have been saved by warriors who could have left them to their fate, who had no tactical reason to risk themselves for mere civilians, yet who risked themselves anyway because it was right. This is the legacy of Vulkan. This is the promise of the Promethean Cult. This is what it means to be a salamander. In isolation do we find our true strength. Through self-sacrifice and endurance beyond all others, do we become inviolable. From the fires of battle are we born. Upon the anvil of war are we tempered. The salamanders endure. The fireborn persevere. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, green-armored warriors stand ready to face whatever horrors the galaxy throws at them, secure in the knowledge that their cause is just, their faith is strong, and their duty is clear. They are humanity's protectors. They are the Emperor's fire. They are the sons of Vulkan, and they shall know no fear. As the great fires of Nocturne continue to burn, as new aspirants enter the Solatorium to begin their transformation, as veterans return from distant wars to walk among the people who gave them life, the cycle continues. Each generation of salamanders inherits the legacy of those who came before, adding their own deeds to the long history of the chapter, carrying the light of the Promethean Cult into the darkness of the 41st millennium. The galaxy is a hostile place, more hostile even than Nocturne itself. There are threats beyond counting, enemies beyond imagining, horrors that would break the mind of any ordinary mortal. Yet the salamanders face these threats without flinching, secure in their faith, certain of their purpose. They know that they may fall, that any battle might be their last, that the enemies of mankind are legion and seemingly endless. But they also know that as long as one salamander still draws breath, as long as the forges of Nocturne still burn, as long as the Promethean Cult endures, the fire will never go out. Humanity will have its champions. The innocent will have their protectors. The darkness will be held at bay for one more day, one more year, one more millennium. This is the oath of the Fireborn. This is the promise of Vulkan's sons. This is the eternal vigil of the Salamanders. Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war. In the long and blood-soaked history of the Salamanders Chapter, there are moments that shine brightly in the annals of their great deeds, tales of heroism and sacrifice that inspire generation after generation of fireborn warriors. But there are also darker chapters, tragedies that leave scars upon the soul of the chapter itself, wounds that take decades or even centuries to heal. The death of Captain Ko'tan Kadai was one such tragedy, a loss so profound that it would shake the Third Company to its very foundations and set in motion events that would test the bonds of brotherhood as they had rarely been tested before. To understand the weight of this loss, one must first understand the man himself. Ko'tan Kadai was more than a captain of the Salamanders. He was a living embodiment of the Promethean ideal, a warrior whose courage was matched only by his compassion, whose tactical brilliance was tempered by his unwavering commitment to the protection of innocent life. For decades, he had led the Third Company with honor and distinction, earning the respect of his peers, the devotion of his warriors, and the admiration of those fortunate enough to fight alongside him. Kadai's eyes burned with the fire that defined all salamanders, but there was something else in that gaze as well, a warmth that put common soldiers at ease, and reminded even the most battle-hardened space marine of why they fought. He led from the front, as all salamander captains do, never asking his warriors to face any danger he would not face himself. His thunder hammer had crushed countless enemies of the Imperium, and his voice had rallied the Third Company through some of the most desperate battles in living memory. The warriors of the Third Company loved him. Not merely respected him, not simply followed him out of duty or tradition, but truly loved him as brothers love a brother, as sons love a father. Sergeants like dak'ir and tsu'gan, for all their differences, shared this devotion to their captain. The apothecary Fugis watched over the company's spiritual health as much as its physical well-being, but it was Kadai who truly bound them together, whose presence made them more than the sum of their parts. It was this company, this brotherhood of fire, that was dispatched to the world of Stratos to deal with an uprising that had spiraled far beyond the ability of local forces to contain. Stratos was a world unlike most in the Imperium, a planet of floating cities suspended in the upper atmosphere by massive plasma engines and anti-gravity systems. These loft-cities, as the locals called them, hung like jewels above an inhospitable surface, connected by great sky bridges that stretched across the empty air. The three primary cities of Stratos were Cumulan, Nimbaros, and Sirion, and by the time the Salamanders arrived, all three were in the grip of a cult uprising that had claimed tens of thousands of converts. The Cult of Truth, they called themselves, though the name was deeply ironic given their methods. For the members of this cult had their mouths sewn shut with thick black wire, their lips and cheeks threaded through with cruel stitches that prevented speech. Some said they removed their tongues as well, though no one could confirm this, for no member of the cult had ever been heard to speak. Colonel Abel Tonhauser of the 13th Stratoson Air Corps was a veteran of decades of service, a hard man who had seen more than his share of hardship. Yet even he was shaken by what he faced. The cult had emerged seemingly from nowhere, transforming from a small group of disaffected citizens into an army of nearly 100,000 in a matter of months. They fought in eerie silence, attacking without battle cries or shouted orders, dying without screams or pleas for mercy. It was, as Tonhauser would tell Captain Kadai, not natural. The Stratosan forces had been pushed back steadily, losing ground with each passing day. By the time the distress call reached the Salamanders, the situation was desperate. Sirion, the capital city and heart of Stratosan civilization, had fallen entirely to the cultists. The other cities were on the verge of collapse. The courage of the Air Corps, whatever remained of it, hung by the thinnest of threads. Kadai surveyed the situation with the practiced eye of a veteran commander and saw immediately what needed to be done. The Salamanders would enter Sirion in 3 assault groups, conducting a sector-by-sector cleanse of the fallen capital. Hammer would be led by Kadai himself, driving into the northern districts. Anvil would be commanded by Sergeant tsu'gan, pushing through the east. Flame would fall under Sergeant dak'ir's leadership, advancing from the west. Heavy weapon support would accompany each group, and the full might of Third Company's flamers and melters would be brought to bear. For this was exactly the kind of fight the Salamanders were born for, close-quarters urban combat where their mastery of flame weapons could be used to devastating effect. The cramped streets and narrow corridors of Sirion would become killing grounds, the sacred Promethean purifying the cult's corruption one block at a time. Hold the remaining cities, Kadai told Colonel Tonhauser. The Salamanders will deal with Sirion now. You've done your duty as a servant of the Imperium and will be honored for it. These words brought visible relief to the exhausted colonel, though he could scarcely believe that even Space Marines could succeed where so many of his men had died. The assault began with all the fury and precision that had made the Salamanders legends. Green-armored warriors poured through the great gates of Sirion, their weapons roaring, their eyes blazing with righteous anger. The cultists, for all their fanatical devotion, were no match for the Emperor's finest. They died in their hundreds, then their thousands, burned down by gouts of Prometheum or torn apart by bolter fire. Yet something was wrong. Apothecary Fugis had noted it before the assault began, remarking to his captain that the spread of the cult seemed psychological rather than ideological. The implication was clear, though Kadai chose not to dwell upon it. There were forces at work here beyond mere human corruption, powers that operated in the shadows and pulled strings that mortal eyes could not see. The truth of this became apparent as the Salamanders pushed deeper into the city. The cultists were not merely defending their territory, they were channeling the assault groups toward a specific location, the Temple District, where their mysterious leader, the one they called the Speaker, held court. It was a trap, though none of the Salamanders realized it until it was far too late. Deep within the Temple District, in a chamber thick with shadow and the stench of blood sacrifice, Captain Kadai and his warriors finally encountered the source of the cult's power. The Speaker was no mere human hierophant, but a vessel, a puppet of flesh animated by something far more terrible. As Kadai watched, the thing that wore the Speaker's body transformed, its skin splitting to reveal the daemon that had been hiding within all along. What followed was a battle that would be remembered in the annals of Third Company for generations. Kadai faced the daemon alone, while his warriors fought to hold back the seemingly endless tide of cultists that poured into the temple. His thunder hammer blazed with lightning as he traded blows with the creature, each strike tearing away another piece of its borrowed flesh, each parry keeping those terrible talons from finding his heart. The daemon was powerful, its claws like slashes of solidified night, its form radiating the corruption of the warp. But Kadai was a captain of the Salamanders, a warrior who had faced the horrors of the galaxy for more than 2 centuries. He would not yield. He could not yield. Not while his brothers depended upon him, not while innocent lives hung in the balance. With Vulkan's name on his lips, Kadai pressed his attack. His hammer crushed the daemon's shoulder, shattering unholy bone and leaving one arm hanging limp and useless. Ichor hissed from the tears in the creature's earthly form as the captain punished it relentlessly, his faith and fury driving him forward even as his own strength began to wane. The end, when it came, was decisive. Kadai brought his hammer down one final time, crushing the daemon's skull and banishing it back to the warp from whence it came. A chorus of screams ripped from the creature's distended throat as it dissolved into nothingness, the souls it had consumed crying out for succor that would never come. Kadai stood victorious, but the battle had taken a terrible toll. His artificer armor was rent in over a dozen places, his body battered and bloodied from the ferocity of the combat. He leaned heavily on his thunder hammer, struggling to catch his breath, his formidable strength finally beginning to falter. It was in this moment of exhaustion that the true trap was sprung. High above the temple floor, on a stone parapet overlooking the battle below, Sergeant Tsu'gan found himself face to face with a ghost from the chapter's past. Nihilan had once been a salamander, a brother of the chapter, before his fall to corruption. Now he was something else entirely, a sorcerer of chaos, his once noble features twisted by decades of exposure to the warp. Tsu'gan tried to raise his bolter, tried to cry out a warning, but Nihilan's sorcery held him fast, his muscles frozen, his tongue turned to lead in his mouth. He could only watch as the renegade spoke of revenge, of a captain killed for a captain, of the centuries he had spent in the Eye of Terror, nursing his hatred and planning this moment. For the cult of truth, the conquest of Stratos, even the daemon in the temple, all of it had been merely means to an end. Nihilan had orchestrated everything, moving pieces across the board like a master regicide player, all to create this single moment. Kadai, exhausted from his battle with the daemon, standing alone and vulnerable in the heart of the temple. Below, Sergeant Dak'ir saw the danger and moved to protect his captain. He had fought his way through the cultist horde, his chainsaw dripping with the blood of the enemy, and now he rushed toward Kadai with desperate urgency. But he was too slow, too far away, and Nihilan was already taking aim. The multi-melter in the renegade's hands screamed as it discharged, a beam of incandescent fury lancing through the darkness of the temple. The shot caught dak'ir a glancing blow, corroding his battle helm and spinning him away from certain death with a wail of agony. But the beam continued on, undeterred, and struck Ko'tan Kadai full in the chest. Tsu'gan screamed as he fell from the parapet, the sorcerous bonds holding him released at last. The word torn from his throat was denial, pure and absolute, a refusal to accept what his eyes were showing him. He landed in a crouch, shattering rockcrete beneath his armored bulk, and was on his feet instantly, running toward his captain with all the speed his superhuman body could muster. But he already knew it was too late. Kadai's body was lit up like an incendiary as the multi-melter's fury engulfed him. His armor, that beautiful artificer plate that had protected him through countless battles, folded in on itself as the beam's terrible heat reduced ceramite to slag. A scream escaped the captain's lips, a sound that would haunt the dreams of every salamander who heard it, before he collapsed to the ground and was still. Tsu'gan reached his captain's side and fell to his knees. He could not bring himself to touch the corroded remains, could not bear to feel the heat still radiating from the slag that had once been Ko'tan Kadai. Tears streamed down his face, though he was barely aware of them. All he knew was that his captain was dead, and that he had failed to prevent it. The cultists continued their assault, but Tsu'gan no longer cared. The green-armored form of veteran Sergeant Enkeln arrived with reinforcements, and the remaining heretics were slaughtered without mercy. Tsu'gan killed many of them himself, channeling his grief into a berserk rage that left a wall of corpses around his captain's remains. When his bolter ran dry, he tore an eviscerator from a dead cultist's hands and continued killing, cutting and cleaving until no enemy remained standing. Only when the last cultist had fallen did the full weight of what had happened crash down upon him. Tsu'gan fell to his knees in a pool of enemy blood, the eviscerator dropping from nerveless fingers. He carved a groove in the stone floor so that the tainted vitae would not touch his captain's body. Then he closed his eyes and despaired. Nihilan found him like that, kneeling in blood with tears on his face. The veteran sergeant's voice came as if from a great distance, cutting through the fog of grief that had settled over Tsu'gan's mind. "It is over, brother. The enemy are slain. Your battle brother will survive." For a moment, Tsu'gan did not understand. He had forgotten that anyone else existed. Then Nihilan clarified, "Dak'ir. He will live." The words meant nothing to Tsu'gan. Kadai was all that mattered. Kadai was dead. Their captain was dead. Nihilan had escaped, slipping away into the shadows as the salamanders dealt with his cult pawns. He had achieved his vengeance, killing the captain who had slain his own master decades before. A captain for a captain, he had said, and the debt was paid in Kadai's blood. But for the warriors of Third Company, the bill was far from settled. Their beloved leader was gone, taken from them by treachery and sorcery, and the wound left by his passing would not heal easily. The journey back to Nocturne was made in silence. The salamanders of Third Company had achieved their mission objectives, liberating Syrian and breaking the power of the Cult of Truth forever. But the victory tasted like ashes in their mouths. They had lost their captain, and no amount of slain heretics could balance that ledger. Dak'ir survived, as Enkeln had said, though the glancing blow from the multi-melter had left scars that would never fully heal. He remembered the terrible light, the searing pain, and then darkness. When he woke, he was told that Kadai was dead and that Nihilan had escaped. The news struck him like a physical blow, driving the breath from his lungs and leaving him hollow with grief. But it was Tsu'gan who seemed most affected by the tragedy. The fierce sergeant had always prided himself on his strength, his courage, his unwavering devotion to duty. Yet he had failed at the crucial moment. He had been on the parapet, assigned to watch for exactly this kind of treachery, and he had been taken by surprise. Nihilan's sorcery had held him fast while the renegade aimed his weapon and fired. If he had been more vigilant, more resistant to the witch's power, perhaps Kadai would still be alive. This guilt would fester in Tsu'gan's heart for years to come, poisoning his relationships with his brothers and driving him to ever more reckless acts of valor. He sought death in battle, though he would never admit it, hoping that sacrifice might somehow redeem his failure. When death would not come, he pushed himself harder, demanded more of his warriors, became harsher and more unforgiving in his pursuit of perfection. And always, always, there was dak'ir. Nihilan had planted a seed of doubt in tsu'gan's mind, a whispered suggestion that dak'ir sought to supplant him in Kadai's favor. It was not true, or at least not entirely true, but in tsu'gan's grief-maddened state, the suspicion took root and grew. He began to see rivalry where there was only brotherhood, ambition where there was only duty. The Ignean, as tsu'gan called him, became a symbol of everything he resented about his own failure. The tension between the two sergeants became an open secret within Third Company. Where once they had fought side by side as brothers, now they could barely exchange civil words. Their squads took up the feud, partisans forming around each sergeant, and the unity that Kadai had worked so hard to forge began to splinter. The funeral of Ko'tan Kadai was held in the great cavern beneath Mount Deathfire, as befitted a captain of the Salamanders. Over 100 warriors made the pilgrimage from the sanctuary city of Hesiod, marching in solemn procession through the ash drifts and volcanic landscape of Nocturne. The mountain loomed above them, its peak wreathed in flame and smoke, a fitting monument to a life spent in service to fire and forge. Within the cavern, a lake of molten rock cast its warm glow across the assembled Salamanders Chapter. Master Tsu'gan himself presided over the ceremony, his noble countenance marked with honor scars that spoke of centuries of service. The fire drakes, the elite warriors of the First Company, stood guard around their master, their Terminator armor gleaming in the firelight. What remained of Kadai's body was chained to a pyre slab coated in ceramite, suspended above the lava by thick chains piston-drilled to the rock above. His armor, that beautiful artified plate, was corroded beyond recognition, fused with the flesh beneath by the fury of the multi-melter. It was a poor end for such a magnificent warrior, but the Salamanders did not mourn the manner of death. They celebrated the life that had preceded it. Chaplain Elysius spoke the rites of interment, the canticles of immolation echoing through the cavern as the assembled warriors repeated his words. Into fire are we born, so unto fire do we return. The words were ancient, spoken at the funeral of every salamander since the founding of the chapter, but they had never seemed more meaningful than they did now. Dak'ir had been given the honor of working the crane that would lower Kadai's remains into the lava below. It was a duty he accepted with humility and sorrow, knowing that this final act of service would sever forever the bond between captain and sergeant. He watched as the pyre slab descended into the molten rock, watched as the flames consumed what remained of Ko'tan Kadai, and felt something inside himself grow cold despite the heat. Across the lake of fire, tsu'gan watched as well. His eyes met Dak'ir's for a moment, and the hatred that burned there was almost palpable. In that gaze was blame, accusation, and the promise of conflict to come. Whatever brotherhood had existed between them had died with Kadai, consumed by the same flames that now claimed their captain's mortal remains. The ceremony continued with the marking of the mourners. Each salamander in turn approached a votive servitor bearing a brazier of sacred ash and daubed symbols of remembrance upon their armor. Branda priests seared fresh honor scars into their flesh, commemorating the loss of their captain with the pain that was the salamander's constant companion. It was a ritual as old as the chapter itself, a way of ensuring that the fallen would never be forgotten. When the last of the ash had settled and the flames had claimed everything that remained of Ko'tan Kadai, Chapter Master Tsu'gan rose to speak. His voice was deep and resonant, carrying easily to every corner of the cavern, and what he said would shape the future of Third Company for years to come. Nihilan would be the new captain, Tsu'gan declared. The veteran sergeant had served with distinction for many decades, and his loyalty to the chapter was beyond question. He was not Kadai, no one could be, but he would lead Third Company with honor and guide them through the dark days ahead. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some of the sergeants accepted Tsu'gan's decree without question, recognizing Nihilan's worthiness for the position. Others were less sanguine. Tsu'gan in particular seemed to bristle at the news, though he held his tongue in the presence of the chapter master. He had expected his own name to be called, had believed that his devotion to Kadai and his skill in battle made him the obvious choice. To be passed over was a blow to his pride that he would not soon forget. There were whispers in the days that followed, rumors that Tsu'gan's second, a warrior named Iagon, was gathering support for a challenge to Nihilan's appointment. Such politicking was unusual among the Salamanders, whose Promethean ideals emphasized duty over ambition, but the circumstances were far from usual. The company was grieving, its brothers divided by sorrow and recrimination, and some saw opportunity in the chaos. Enkelm, for his part, bore the burden of command with quiet dignity. He knew that he was not Kadai, that he could never inspire the same devotion or wield the same effortless authority. But he also knew that the company needed leadership, needed someone to hold them together while the wounds of Kadai's death slowly healed. If that meant enduring the resentment of warriors who believed they deserved the captain's mantle more than he did, then so be it. The new captain's first order of business was to take the fight to the enemies of the Imperium, to give Third Company a purpose beyond their grief. He requested and received permission to pursue any lead that might bring them closer to Nihilan, the traitor whose treachery had cost them so much. The hunt for the renegade sorcerer would become an obsession for some members of the company, a way of channeling their anger into something productive. But even as they prepared for new battles, the warriors of Third Company could not escape the shadow of what they had lost. Kadai's absence was felt in every briefing, every ritual, every moment of silence between brothers. The captain's chair stood empty at the head of the command chamber. His hammer and personal effects had been interred with him, leaving no physical reminders of the man who had led them so well for so long. Apothecary Fugis was perhaps the most visibly affected by the loss. The sharp-featured medic had served alongside Kadai for decades, watching over his health and that of the entire company. He had been trained to deal with death, to accept it as an inevitable consequence of the Salamanders' endless war, but the loss of his captain proved too much to bear. His faith, which had once burned as brightly as any of his brothers, seemed to flicker and dim in the wake of Kadai's death. It died, Fugis would later confess to dak'ir. My faith was slain along with Kadai. These words, spoken in a moment of weakness, revealed the depth of the apothecary's despair. He had always believed that the Promethean Cult would see him through any trial, that his devotion to Vulkan and the Emperor would sustain him no matter what horrors he witnessed. But watching Kadai's remains descend into the lava of Mount Deathfire had shattered something inside him, left him hollow in a way that no amount of prayer or ritual could fill. Dak'ir listened to Fugis's confession without judgment, understanding all too well the doubt that plagued his brother. He too had struggled in the aftermath of Kadai's death, questioning his own worth as a warrior and a salamander. The Ignean heritage that set him apart from his brothers seemed more pronounced than ever, a barrier that prevented him from fully sharing in their grief or their resolve. Yet dak'ir also knew that such despair was itself a betrayal of what Kadai had taught them. The captain had always emphasized resilience, the ability to endure and overcome no matter the odds. He would not have wanted his warriors to succumb to grief, to let his death become an excuse for failure. The best way to honor Kadai's memory was to carry on his legacy, to continue protecting the innocent and defending the weak as he had always done. This realization would drive dak'ir forward in the years to come, pushing him to become a better warrior and a better leader. He would never forget Kadai, would carry the captain's teachings in his heart until his own end, but he would not let that memory become a chain that bound him to the past. There was still work to be done, still enemies to fight, still innocent lives to save. The same could not be said of all his brothers. Tsu'gan's grief curdled into rage, his guilt into aggression. He threw himself into battle with reckless abandon, seeking glory and redemption in equal measure. His warriors followed him out of loyalty and fear, knowing that their sergeant would lead them into the fires of war without hesitation or mercy. And always, the tension between tsu'gan and dak'ir simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. They fought alongside each other when duty demanded it, but there was no brotherhood between them anymore, only suspicion and resentment. The company that Kadai had worked so hard to unite was fracturing, and no one knew how to stop it. Captain Enkelm watched these developments with growing concern. He was a good warrior and a competent commander, but he lacked Kadai's charisma, his ability to inspire loyalty and unity through sheer force of personality. The feuding sergeants paid lip service to his authority while continuing their private war, and the company's effectiveness suffered as a result. Something would have to change, Enkelm knew. Either the wounds of Kadai's death would heal, and the company would be reforged stronger than before, or the divisions would widen until Third Company tore itself apart from within. The captain prayed daily to Vulkan for guidance, hoping that the Primarch would show him the path forward. But no answer came, and the future remained uncertain. In the great cavern beneath Mount Deathfire, the lava continued to flow as it had for millennia. The flames that had consumed Ko'tan Kadai burned on, indifferent to the grief and turmoil they had caused. "Into fire are we born," the Salamanders said. "So unto fire do we return." Kadai had returned to the fire from whence all salamanders come. His spirit, whatever remained of it, had joined the flames of Nocturne, become one with the volcanic heart of their homeworld. In this, at least, there was a kind of peace. The captain's struggles were over, his battles finally won. But for the warriors he had left behind, the war was only beginning. The hunt for Nihilan would consume years of their lives. The feud between dak'ir and tsu'gan would grow ever more bitter. Nihilan would struggle to hold the company together while pursuing enemies both within and without. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Nihilan smiled. His vengeance was complete, but he was far from finished with the salamanders. The death of Kadai was merely the first move in a much larger game, a game that would not end until one side or the other was utterly destroyed. "A captain for a captain," the renegade had said, but he intended to collect far more than that before the end. The flames of Mount Deathfire burned on, as they always had, as they always would, and the salamanders of Third Company carried the weight of their loss with them into an uncertain future, forged anew in the fires of grief, and determined to honour their captain's memory no matter the cost, into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war, for Kadai, for Vulkan, for the Emperor. In the wake of Captain Ko'tan Kadai's death, the Third Company of the Salamanders found itself adrift in a sea of grief and uncertainty. The bonds that had held them together, forged in the fires of countless battles and tempered by their shared devotion to the Promethean Cult, had been weakened by the loss of their beloved leader. Where once there had been unity, now there were fractures. Where once there had been brotherhood, now there was suspicion and resentment. The trials that awaited the Third Company would test them as they had never been tested before, pushing them to the very limits of their endurance and forcing each warrior to confront the darkness within his own heart. At the centre of this brewing storm stood two sergeants whose rivalry would come to define the company's struggles in the months and years following Kadai's death. dak'ir and tsu'gan were both exceptional warriors, both devoted servants of the Emperor and Vulkan, yet they could not have been more different in temperament and outlook. Their conflict, born of grief and guilt and long-simmering resentment, would threaten to tear the Third Company apart from within. Dak'ir was an Ignean, a term that carried both literal and symbolic weight among the salamanders. The Igneans were the cave dwellers of Nocturne, those who lived in the subterranean depths far from the seven sanctuary cities where most of the planet's population made their homes. They were considered lowborn by the standards of Nocturnian society, their bloodlines outside the noble lineages that had produced most of the chapter's recruits throughout its long history. Dak'ir was, in fact, the first Ignean ever to be inducted into the Salamanders, a distinction that set him apart from his brothers in ways both subtle and profound. This heritage should not have mattered. The Promethean Cult taught that all salamanders were brothers, united by their gene seed and their shared devotion to Vulkan's ideals. In the fires of transformation, old distinctions were supposed to burn away, leaving only the pure metal of Astartes brotherhood. But old prejudices die hard, even among the Emperor's finest, and there were those within the chapter who viewed Dak'ir's Ignean blood as a mark against him, a sign that he was somehow less worthy than those born to the great houses of the sanctuary cities. Chief among these detractors was tsu'gan. The proud sergeant came from impeccable Nocturnian stock, his lineage stretching back generations to the warrior kings who had ruled before Vulkan united the tribes. He was, by any measure, the epitome of Promethean perfection, strong, courageous, self-sacrificing, and devoted to the chapter's traditions with a fervour that bordered on fanaticism. Warriors like tsu'gan were easy to admire, easy to follow, and he had gathered many supporters among the sergeants and battle brothers of Third Company. Yet tsu'gan also possessed an arrogant streak that his admirers often overlooked. He sought advancement aggressively, hungry for glory and recognition in a way that sometimes put personal ambition above the good of the company. His contempt for Dak'ir was rooted not merely in prejudice against the Ignean's lowborn status, but also in jealousy, for Kadai had taken a special interest in the unusual sergeant, seeing in him potential that others missed. The tension between these two warriors had existed for years, a simmering rivalry that occasionally flared into open conflict before being suppressed by Kadai's firm hand. But with Kadai gone, there was no one to keep the peace between them. Their feud, once a minor irritant, began to metastasize into something far more dangerous. Tsu'gan blamed dak'ir for Kadai's death. The accusation was unfair, born of grief rather than reason, but it lodged in Tsu'gan's heart like a poisoned splinter. He had been on the parapet when Nihilan struck, held fast by the sorcerer's power, while the traitor took aim at their captain. If anyone had failed Kadai, it was Tsu'gan himself, who had abandoned his post in pursuit of glory and left his captain vulnerable. But acknowledging this truth was more than Tsu'gan could bear, so he projected his guilt onto dak'ir instead, convincing himself that the Ignian's presence at Kadai's side in those final moments was somehow proof of his complicity in the tragedy. Dak'ir, for his part, struggled with his own demons. The multi-melter beam that killed Kadai had struck him a glancing blow, corroding his battle helm and leaving scars that would never fully heal. He had been so close, close enough to feel the terrible heat of the weapon that slew his captain, yet not close enough to save him. The guilt of survival weighed heavily on dak'ir's shoulders, made worse by the knowledge that some of his brothers held him responsible for Kadai's death. Beyond the guilt, there was also the matter of dak'ir's unusual nature. Unlike most space marines, whose memories of their lives before transformation were fragmentary at best, dak'ir possessed perfect recall of his human childhood. He could remember every detail of his existence in the caves beneath Nocturne's surface, every moment of his journey from lowborn Ignian to sergeant of the 3rd Company. This exceptional memory retention was more than merely unusual. It was unprecedented, and it had attracted the attention of those who studied such anomalies. Even more troubling were the visions that plagued dak'ir's dreams. They had begun as occasional disturbances during battle meditation, fragmentary images that seemed to carry meaning beyond their literal content. Over time, however, they had grown more frequent and more intense. Dak'ir dreamed of fire and destruction, of ancient wars and forgotten heroes, of mysteries buried deep in the galaxy's past. Sometimes he dreamed of Nocturne itself, seeing his homeworld consumed by volcanic fury until nothing remained but ash and memory. These visions troubled dak'ir deeply, for he did not know their source or their purpose. Were they simply the product of an overactive mind, echoes of trauma and grief manifesting as symbolic imagery, or were they something more, messages from some unknown power trying to communicate with him through the medium of dreams? The uncertainty gnawed at him, adding another layer of isolation to his already lonely existence within the company. Librarian Piriel had taken notice of dak'ir's unusual qualities. The epistolary-level psyker watched the sergeant with an intensity that dak'ir found unsettling, his eyes occasionally flashing with cerulean fire as he examined the Ignian with senses beyond the merely physical. Piriel had been present at Kadai's funeral, standing among the elite warriors of the chapter, and his gaze had found dak'ir across the lake of fire with an expression that suggested recognition, as if he saw something in the sergeant that others could not perceive. What Piriel saw, and what he intended to do about it, remained a mystery. The librarian was not one to share his thoughts freely, and his presence on the company's subsequent missions seemed to serve purposes beyond mere tactical support. Was he watching dak'ir on behalf of Master Velkona and the librarian? Had Chapter Master Tushan instructed him to assess the feuding sergeants and report on the depth of their enmity? Or was there some other imperative guiding Piriel's actions, something related to the visions that haunted dak'ir's sleep? The questions accumulated, but answers remained elusive. Into this troubled company stepped Nenkelm, the new captain appointed by Tushan to replace the fallen Kadai. Nenkelm was a veteran sergeant, Kadai's second in command, and by tradition and merit he was the natural choice to assume the captain's mantle. He had served with distinction for many decades, his loyalty and courage beyond question. Yet he was not Kadai, and he knew it better than anyone. The ceremony of his ascension was performed in the great cavern beneath Mount Deathfire, where Kadai's remains had been consigned to the flames. Nenkelm stood naked before the chapter master, fresh honor scars burned into his chest and shoulder by the brand of priests. A pillar of fire erupted from the dais where he knelt, engulfing him completely in its purifying embrace. When the flames died away, he emerged transformed, his coal-black skin shimmering with inner strength. Through elemental fire is our metal gauged and our devotion measured, Tushan declared, his voice deep and resonant as the earth itself. Endurance and fortitude are the tenets of our law and creed. Sacrifice and honor are the virtues we fireborn uphold. With humility do we guard against hubris and our own vainglory. Vulkan's fire beats in my breast. Tsu'gan began, thumping his plastron with a gauntleted fist. With it, I shall smite the foes of the Emperor, Nihilan concluded, accepting his new rank and all the burdens that came with it. But acceptance by the chapter master did not guarantee acceptance by the company. Tsu'gan, in particular, made no secret of his displeasure at Nihilan's appointment. He had expected his own name to be called, had believed that his devotion to Kadai and his martial prowess made him the obvious choice for captain. To be passed over in favor of Nihilan, whom Tsu'gan considered adequate but uninspiring, was a blow to his pride that he could not easily forgive. There were whispers that Tsu'gan's second, a warrior named Iagon, had begun gathering support among the sergeants for a challenge to Nihilan's leadership. Such politicking was unusual among the Salamanders, whose Promethean ideals emphasized duty over ambition, but these were unusual times. The company was grieving, divided by sorrow and recrimination, and some saw opportunity in the chaos. Nihilan was aware of these murmurings, though he chose not to confront them directly. Instead, he focused on what he could control, preparing the company for their next mission, giving them a purpose beyond their grief. He met privately with dak'ir in the Strategium, the chamber where tactical decisions were made, and spoke with surprising candor about his own doubts and insecurities. "I know of the discontent among the sergeants," Nihilan admitted, his eyes flat as he regarded dak'ir across the altar table strewn with maps and tactical documents. "Kadai's legacy casts a long shadow. I cannot help but be eclipsed by it. I only hope I am worthy of his memory, that my succession was justified." Dak'ir was taken aback by this frankness. He had not expected his captain to be so forthright about his vulnerabilities. "You were Brother Captain Kadai's second-in-command, sir," he replied. "It is only right and proper you succeeded him." Nihilan nodded, though whether at dak'ir's words or at some inner counsel the sergeant could not tell. The new captain then made an unexpected offer. He wanted to promote dak'ir to the Inferno Guard, his personal command squad, to serve as company champion in place of Vulkan, who had fallen on Stratos. It was a significant honor, a sign of Nihilan's trust and respect for the Ignean sergeant. But dak'ir refused. "Sir, on Stratos I failed to protect Brother Captain Kadai, and that mistake cost his life and damaged this company into the bargain," he said. "I will serve you with faith and loyalty, but with the deepest regret I cannot accept this honor." Nihilan accepted the refusal with visible disappointment, but he did not press the matter. Instead, he revealed his plan for the company's next mission. They would return to the Hadron Belt, the region of space where Stratos was located, to hunt for Nihilan and the Dragon Warriors. Librarian Imperium had detected a psychic echo of the renegade's presence among the debris fields and star clusters of the system. It was a slim hope, but Nihilan believed the company needed this mission, needed a purpose to heal their wounds and restore their brotherhood. Dak'ir left the Strategium feeling uneasy. Nihilan's candor, his admission of doubt, had been disquieting. Despite Tsu'gan's arrogance and vainglory, dak'ir found himself wondering if the other sergeant might be right. Perhaps Nihilan was not ready for the honor that had been bestowed upon him. Perhaps he was captain in name alone. These doubts would be tested soon enough, as the third company embarked on a series of missions that would push them to their limits and beyond. The hunt for the Dragon Warriors led the company deep into the Hadron Belt, that vast expanse of space littered with asteroid fields and the detritus of ancient cosmic events. For months they searched, following Imperium's psychic traces across countless star systems, finding only dead ends and cold trails. The renegades had covered their tracks well, disappearing into the void like ghosts. It was during this search that they encountered the Archimedes Rex, an Ark-class forge ship of the Adeptus Mechanicus drifting dead in the void. The massive vessel, a floating city of dark metal dedicated to the omniscia and the mysteries of technology, had clearly suffered some catastrophe. Its hull was charred and laser-blackened, its shields and engines dead, its weapon systems dormant, yet something had survived aboard the stricken ship, and the Salamanders were duty-bound to investigate. What they found aboard the Archimedes Rex was a mystery wrapped in an enigma. The ship's crew, both the human ratings and the cybernetic servitors, had fallen into a strange catatonia, alive but unresponsive, their minds seemingly shut down by some unknown trauma. A Magos was discovered in a Mechanicus temple, kneeling in endless supplication, rocking back and forth in a pattern so exact and repeated that it seemed more mechanical than organic. Tsu'gan wanted to kill the Magos immediately, convinced that the creature was a trap waiting to be sprung. Dak'ir stopped him, refusing to allow the execution of what might be an innocent victim in cold blood. The confrontation between the two sergeants was brief but intense, their mutual antagonism on full display for all their brothers to witness. In the end, Tsu'gan backed down, but the incident only deepened the rift between them. The truth of what had befallen the Archimedes Rex proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. The Ford ship had been attacked by pirates and left to drift, but before the Salamanders could complete their investigation, another vessel arrived in the system, a ship bearing the colors of the Marines Malevolent, one of the most ruthless and controversial chapters in the Imperium. The Marines Malevolent operated under a philosophy diametrically opposed to the Salamanders' own beliefs. Where the sons of Vulkan valued the sanctity of human life above all else, the Marines Malevolent viewed ordinary humans as expendable resources, acceptable casualties in the pursuit of victory. Their reputation for callous disregard of civilian lives had earned them the enmity of many Imperial forces, and their arrival at the Archimedes Rex immediately created tension. Captain Vinyar of the Marines Malevolent claimed salvage rights to the Ford ship, insisting that his chapter had been tracking the vessel for weeks. His warriors moved through the Archimedes Rex with a casual brutality that sickened the Salamanders, treating the catatonic crew as obstacles to be cleared rather than victims to be protected. When one of the Marines Malevolent raised his weapon to execute a helpless servitor, dak'ir intervened, physically blocking the kill. The confrontation that followed nearly escalated into open combat between the two chapters. Only the intervention of senior officers prevented bloodshed, but the incident highlighted the fundamental differences between the Salamanders and those who did not share their values. Bad deeds are bad deeds, dak'ir told Captain Vinyar. There is no scale upon which they can be weighed against your victories, no measure that can account for monstrous acts. Vinyar's response was contemptuous dismissal, but the words stayed with dak'ir long after the Marines Malevolent had departed with their salvage. He had spoken for the Salamander's conscience, had upheld Kadai's teachings in the face of those who would dismiss them as weakness. It was a small victory, perhaps, but it reminded him of why the Third Company fought, of what set them apart from chapters that had lost their way. The search for Nihilan continued, leading the company to a world called Scoria, an ash-covered planet that bore an eerie resemblance to Nocturne itself. Here, the Third Company's strike cruiser, the Vulkan's Wrath, was caught in a solar storm that damaged its engines and sent it crashing to the planet's surface. The Salamanders found themselves stranded on a hostile world, their ship partially buried in the ash, forced to excavate and repair while dealing with whatever dangers Scoria might hold. Those dangers proved considerable. The planet was not as lifeless as it first appeared. Creatures lurked beneath the ash, predators that attacked the excavation crews without warning. And beyond the immediate threats, there was something else. A presence that both dak'ir and Periel could sense but not identify. It was not the mind of a Xenos, nor the taint of chaos. It was, as Periel described it, something else entirely. The librarian shared his observations with dak'ir during a quiet moment on the ash plains. "Look out there," he said, gesturing to the grey horizon. "Not what there is, but what you see." Dak'ir looked hard at the landscape, seeing ash and distant volcanic spires, dark clouds and the constant rain of grey flakes that had buried this world over millennia. And then he understood. "I see Nocturne," he said. Periel nodded with satisfaction. "Beneath the layers of ash there is rock," he explained. "The volcanoes have been venting for so long that the grey flakes have made this place a grey world, with darkling skies bereft of life. Scoria, I suspect, was once much like Nocturne, only more advanced in its geological cycle." The librarian stooped and placed a hand against the ground, beckoning dak'ir to do the same. There was a tremor running through the earth, faint but insistent like a pulsing vein. "Those are the last heartbeats of a dying world, brother," Periel told him. "All worlds end. Nocturne's demise might be millennia from now, it might only be a matter of centuries. I wonder if our progenitor brought us here to see something of our homeworld's fate." Before dak'ir could respond, seismic thunder erupted from the crash site. The Vulkan's Wrath shifted and sank, displacing massive clouds of ash that engulfed the surrounding area. When the dust settled, something had been revealed beneath the ship's hull, something that changed everything. Tsu'gan, leading a scouting party across the ash dunes, made an even more startling discovery. Hidden in a basin beyond the crash site was a fortress, its walls festooned with spikes and grisly totems, its battlements crowned with sigils that hurt to look upon. The symbols were icons of the ruinous powers, and at the gate was stamped the most prominent of all, a single armored skull with the 8-pointed star of chaos behind it. Iron warriors, sons of Perturabo, hissed one of the sergeants with obvious rancor. Traitors. The Iron Warriors were among the most feared of the traitor legions, peerless siege masters who had fortified positions across the galaxy during the Horus Heresy and maintained hidden bastions ever since. Their presence on Scoria explained much about the planet's mystery, but it also presented the Third Company with a terrible challenge. The Salamanders were stranded, their ship damaged, their numbers limited. An assault on an Iron Warrior's fortress, even a small outpost, was a prospect that gave any commander pause. Yet there was no alternative. The Iron Warriors would not simply allow the Salamanders to repair their ship and depart. Sooner or later, the traitors would discover the crash site and attack. Better to strike first, to seize the initiative and hope that surprise could compensate for the disadvantages the Third Company faced. Nihilan made the decision to assault the fortress, committing all available forces to a coordinated attack. Tsu'gan's scouting party would occupy the outer redoubts in a silent infiltration, then signal when the main force was in position. It was a desperate gamble, the kind of bold stroke that Kadai might have attempted, and every warrior in the company knew that many of them would not survive. But that was the Salamanders' way. They did not shrink from sacrifice, did not measure the cost of victory in lives saved or lost. They knew only duty, only the imperative to protect the innocent and destroy the enemies of mankind. If that duty required them to throw themselves against the walls of an Iron Warrior's fortress, then they would do so without hesitation, trusting in their faith and their brotherhood to see them through. The battle for the Iron Warrior's fortress was brutal and bloody, as all such engagements must be. The traitors fought with the cold fury of warriors who had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of defense, and the Salamanders paid for every meter of ground with the blood of their brothers. But they did not falter. They pushed forward through walls of fire and storms of bolt shells, their own weapons roaring in response, their battle cries echoing across the ash-covered plains. Tsu'gan led his warriors into the fortress's heart with reckless courage, seeking redemption through valor, hoping that glory might somehow wash away the stain of Kadai's death. He fought like a daemon himself, cutting down Iron Warriors with bolter and blade, his armor scored by a dozen near misses, his body sustained by nothing but fury and the gene-enhanced resilience of his Astartes physiology. Dak'ir fought alongside his own squad, Vulkan at his side as always. The massive heavy weapons trooper was a fearsome sight in battle, his weapons roaring without cease, his voice raised in the battle hymns of the Promethean Cult. He was dak'ir's most trusted comrade, a warrior whose loyalty had never wavered despite the tensions that divided the company. When dak'ir had felt most isolated, most alone in his guilt and his doubts, Vulkan had been there to remind him that brotherhood still existed within the Third Company. The fortress fell, eventually, though the cost was high. Many Salamanders had given their lives to claim this victory, their bodies consigned to the flames, even as their brothers secured the walls and purged the last of the traitor defenders. It was a triumph, of sorts, but it tasted of ash in the mouths of those who survived. For the trials of the Third Company were far from over. The hunt for Nihilan continued, the search for answers about Vulkan's fate and the mysterious artifacts he had left behind. Nihilan struggled to hold the company together while facing enemies both external and internal. Tsu'gan and dak'ir remained locked in their private war, their rivalry threatening to undo everything Kadai had built. And dak'ir's visions grew ever more intense, showing him things he did not understand, pointing toward a destiny he could not yet perceive. Piriel watched and waited, his own agenda hidden behind inscrutable eyes. Fugis, the company's apothecary, wrestled with a crisis of faith that had begun at Kadai's funeral and showed no signs of abating. Even Vulkan, eternally optimistic, could feel the weight of darkness pressing in on all sides. The Salamanders were being tested as they had rarely been tested before. The fires of adversity burned hot around them, threatening to consume all they held dear. But fire was their element, the crucible in which they had been forged, and they would not yield to its fury. They were sons of Vulkan, fire-born warriors who had faced the worst the galaxy could throw at them and emerged stronger for the ordeal. Into fire are we born, they whispered to each other in the quiet moments between battles. So unto fire do we return. The Third Company endured. The Brotherhood, fractured though it was, held together through shared sacrifice and common purpose. Dak'ir and tsu'gan continued their feud, but they also continued to fight side by side when duty demanded it, their personal animosity set aside in the face of greater threats. Kelm grew into his role as captain, learning to lead in his own way, rather than trying to be a pale imitation of Kadai. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Nihilan plotted his next move, his vengeance incomplete, his hatred undiminished. The dragon warriors were still out there, still nursing their ancient grudges, still scheming to bring ruin upon the chapter that had cast them out. The trials of the Third Company had only begun. Greater challenges awaited them, tests of faith and courage that would push them to their absolute limits. Some would fall along the way, their names added to the long rolls of honored dead maintained in the vaults of Prometheus. Others would rise, proving themselves worthy of the legacy they had inherited. But through it all, the fire would burn. The Promethean flame that had been kindled in the hearts of the first salamanders, 10,000 years before, would continue to illuminate the darkness. As long as that flame endured, as long as even one son of Vulkan still drew breath, the Third Company would persevere. For they were the Fireborn. They were the shields of humanity. They were the sons of Nocturne, and they would never abandon their duty. In the vaults of Prometheus, the fortress monastery that orbits Nocturne like a silent guardian, there exists a collection of texts so sacred that only the highest masters of the Salamanders Chapter are permitted to read them. These are the volumes of the Tome of Fire, written by the hand of Vulkan himself in ages long past, and within their pages lie the secrets that could shape the destiny of an entire chapter. For the Tome of Fire is not merely a record of history or a collection of philosophical musings. It is a map, of sorts, pointing the way to 9 artifacts of unimaginable power that the Primarch scattered across the galaxy for his sons to find. The story of these artifacts, and the quest to recover them, is woven into the very fabric of what it means to be a salamander. It is a story of faith and determination, of mysteries buried deep in the darkness between stars, of hope that one day the chapter will be reunited with the full legacy of their progenitor. And for some, it is a story that whispers of something even greater, the possibility that Vulkan himself might return, emerging from whatever fate claimed him 10,000 years ago to lead his sons once more. To understand the significance of these relics, one must first understand the nature of Vulkan and his relationship with his legion. Unlike many of the Primarchs, who viewed their space marines primarily as weapons of war, Vulkan saw his sons as craftsmen and protectors, warriors who fought not for glory or conquest, but for the preservation of innocent life. He was himself a master smith without peer, capable of forging weapons and artifacts that rivaled the greatest works of the Dark Age of technology. The forges of Nocturne had produced wonders under his guidance, items of such power and beauty that they became legends in their own right. When Vulkan disappeared during the dark days of the Horus Heresy, his loss was felt as keenly as a blade through the heart of every salamander. The Legion had been nearly destroyed at the Dropsite massacre on Istvan V, where they had been betrayed alongside the Raven Guard and Iron Hands by brothers they had trusted. Vulkan himself was believed to have fallen in that terrible battle, though the circumstances of his death, or his survival, remained shrouded in mystery. But before he vanished, Vulkan had prepared for the possibility of his absence. He had written the Tome of Fire, filling its pages with prophecies and riddles, with guidance for his sons in the dark times he knew were coming. And hidden within those cryptic passages were clues to the locations of 9 artifacts he had created, items of such significance that their recovery would mark major turning points in the chapter's history. The Tome of Fire itself is an artifact of considerable wonder. It is not a single volume, as the name might suggest, but rather dozens of books arrayed in the circular stacks of the Pantheon chamber deep within Prometheus. The words upon its pages are said to be inked partly in Vulkan's own blood, and they shimmer like captured fire when held up to the light. Deciphering the script is no easy task, for the Primarch wrote in riddles and metaphors, hiding his meanings behind layers of symbolism that only the most wise and patient of his sons can unravel. It foretold of great events and upheavals for those with the wit to perceive them. But perhaps most pointedly, the Tome of Fire contained the history, form, and location of the 9 artifacts Vulkan had hidden throughout the galaxy for the salamanders to unearth. 5 of these holiest of relics had been discovered over the centuries through the travails of the Forge Fathers. The locations of the remaining 4 were embedded cryptically within the tome's arcane pages, waiting for the day when the chapter would be ready to claim them. The Forge Fathers are a unique institution within the Salamanders Chapter, warriors chosen to undertake the sacred quest of recovering Vulkan's lost artifacts. They venture out into the galaxy alone or with small retinues, following the clues hidden in the Tome of Fire, seeking the relics that will complete the chapter's inheritance. It is a lonely and dangerous duty, one that may consume decades or even centuries of a warrior's life. But there is no greater honor for a salamander than to be chosen as Forge Father, to walk in the footsteps of the Primarch and bring his works back to Nocturne. The artifacts themselves are varied in form and function, each one a masterpiece of Vulkan's unparalleled craftsmanship. Some are weapons of devastating power, capable of laying low the mightiest enemies of mankind. Others are tools of protection or symbols of authority, items that carry the weight of the Primarch's legacy and inspire all who behold them. Each artifact recovered is a cause for celebration throughout the chapter, a sign that Vulkan's plan for his sons continues to unfold across the millennia. Among the relics already recovered is the Spear of Vulkan, a weapon of such potency that it is said to have been wielded by the Primarch himself in the greatest battles of the Great Crusade. The Gauntlet of the Forge is another, a massive armored glove that grants its wearer the strength to shape metal with bare hands, as Vulkan once did in the forges of Nocturne. The Chalice of Fire, the Engine of Woes, the Obsidian Chariot, each recovered artifact adds to the chapter's arsenal of sacred relics and brings them one step closer to completing their progenitor's final gift. But 4 artifacts remain lost, their locations hidden in the pages of the Tome of Fire, waiting for Forge Fathers with the wisdom and courage to find them. The chapter masters and librarians pore over the ancient texts, seeking any hint that might point the way to these final relics. Some believe that the recovery of all 9 artifacts will herald Vulkan's return, that the Primarch left them as a test for his sons, and that only when they prove themselves worthy by finding all of them will he emerge from wherever he has been hidden for 10,000 years. Others are more skeptical, viewing the artifacts as simply the final gifts of a father to his children, valuable in their own right but not necessarily connected to any larger destiny. The truth, as with so much concerning Vulkan and his works, remains shrouded in mystery. The discovery of Vulkan's sigil represents one of the most sacred of the recovered artifacts. This simulacrum of the great hammer wielded by the Primarch himself has passed down through generations of chaplains, each one adding to its legacy of service. To carry Vulkan's sigil is to bear a heavy responsibility, for the chaplain must embody the values of the Promethean Cult in all things. The artifact itself seems to pulse with an inner fire, a reminder of the flame that burns at the heart of every salamander. The sigil has proven its worth in battle countless times, warding off the malign influences of chaos and strengthening the faith of those who fight alongside its bearer. When Chaplain Elysius bore the artifact into the tunnels beneath an Iron Warrior's fortress on the ash world of Scoria, its power was all that stood between the salamanders and a sorcerous corruption that threatened to turn them against each other. The holy light of Vulkan's sigil pushed back the darkness, allowing the warriors to retain their sanity and continue their mission. Such is the power of Vulkan's artifacts. They are not merely weapons or tools, but embodiments of the Primarch's will, extensions of his protective presence across the millennia. To wield one is to feel a connection to Vulkan himself, to draw upon a wellspring of strength and faith that transcends the merely physical. The quest for these artifacts has led the salamanders to strange and dangerous places across the galaxy. They have delved into the heart of space hulks drifting through the void, explored ancient ruins on worlds long forgotten by the Imperium, and ventured into territories claimed by Xenos and heretics alike. The clues in the Tome of Fire are often obscure, requiring years of interpretation before their meaning becomes clear. A reference to "the place where stars are born" might point to a nebula thousands of light years away. A passage about the Forge of the Enemy could indicate a world once held by traitors during the heresy. Each Forge Father approaches the quest in his own way, guided by his interpretation of the Tome of Fire and his own instincts as a warrior and seeker. Some focus on a single artifact, dedicating their entire lives to its recovery. Others cast a wider net, following multiple leads in the hope that one will prove fruitful. All understand that failure is a real possibility, that they may spend centuries searching and never find what they seek. But the quest itself is considered sacred, a form of worship as valid as any ritual performed in the temples of Nocturne. The discovery of an artifact is always accompanied by strange circumstances and apparent coincidences that some interpret as signs of Vulkan's guiding hand. A Forge Father might find himself stranded on a seemingly random world, only to discover that the very ground beneath his feet conceals one of the lost relics. A routine mission might bring a salamander into contact with a clue that has been waiting millennia to be found. These coincidences are too numerous and too significant to be dismissed as mere chance, leading many in the chapter to believe that Vulkan is somehow still watching over his sons, orchestrating events from wherever he now resides. Such was the case when Sergeant Dak'ir discovered a mysterious chest aboard the stricken Mechanicus forge ship Archimedes Rex. The chest bore Vulkan's mark, a unique brand carried only by the Primarch and his Forge Fathers, and its origin stamp indicated that it had come from Istvan, the very world where Vulkan had supposedly met his end. The discovery sent shockwaves through the chapter, igniting debate about what the chest might contain and what its existence might mean for the future of the Salamanders. Some proposed that it meant the return of Vulkan after so many millennia in unknown isolation. Others refuted this, claiming that the Primarch was not lost on Istvan at all, but had returned already at the breaking of the legions, and whatever the chest contained it could not relate to that. More still remained silent and merely watched and waited, unwilling to hope, not daring to suggest what apocalypse might be about to befall the Salamanders if their progenitor had fated a reunion. The chest itself defied all attempts to open it, its seals holding fast against even the psychic probing of the chapter's most powerful librarians. Whatever secrets it contained would reveal themselves only when the time was right, in accordance with whatever plan Vulkan had set in motion 10,000 years before. Chapter Master Tushan convened a council of the chapter's masters to consult the Tome of Fire, hoping to find some passage that might illuminate the mystery of the chest. The Pantheon chamber was opened, the sacred texts brought forth, and for days the masters pored over the cryptic writings of their Primarch. What they found was both illuminating and troubling passages that seemed to predict the chest's discovery, references to a time of trial that would test the Salamanders as never before, and hints of a destiny that would unfold in fire and blood. "The sky is bloody," Chaplain Elesius read from the tome, his voice echoing through the assembly hall where Third Company had gathered to hear the council's findings. "Deathfire has given up its sons. These are the scriptures of the Tome of Fire, as left to us by our Primarch. And in this, he brandished the chest like a holy icon. He has shown us his way." The interpretation of these passages remained a matter of debate, but their immediate implications were clear. The Salamanders were on the cusp of something momentous, a turning point in their long history. Whether this would prove to be a blessing or a catastrophe, only time would tell. What followed was a series of events that seemed to confirm the dire predictions of the Tome of Fire. The Third Company found themselves stranded on the ash world of Scoria after their strike cruiser, the Vulkan's Wrath, crashed on its surface. There they discovered not only an Iron Warrior's fortress, but also remnants of their own past, ancient warriors who had fought alongside Vulkan himself during the dark days of the heresy. The mysteries piled upon mysteries, each new revelation raising more questions than it answered. And through it all, the artifacts of Vulkan remained at the heart of the chapter's identity and purpose. They were not merely relics to be collected and displayed, they were keys to understanding the Primarch's vision for his sons, guideposts on a journey that had begun 10,000 years ago and was far from complete. Every salamander who donned the green armor of the chapter became part of that journey, whether he fought on the front lines of the Imperium's wars or dedicated himself to the scholarly pursuit of the Tome of Fire's secrets. The relationship between the Salamanders and their artifacts reflects the broader philosophy of the Promethean Cult. Just as the forge transforms raw metal into finished weapons through the application of heat and pressure, so too are the Salamanders themselves transformed through their trials and tribulations. The quest for the artifacts is itself a form of forging, a process that shapes the chapter and its warriors into something stronger and more refined with each passing generation. This is why the Salamanders do not simply guard their recovered artifacts in sealed vaults, hidden away from the galaxy's dangers. They use them, carrying them into battle against the enemies of mankind, allowing them to fulfill the purpose for which Vulkan created them. The spear of Vulkan has tasted the blood of countless Xenos and heretics. The gauntlet of the forge has crushed the skulls of traitors and daemons alike. Each use adds to the artifact's legend, weaving new chapters into stories that began in the forges of Nocturne before the Imperium itself was founded. For the Salamanders understand that artifacts, like warriors, are meant to be used, not preserved in sterile isolation. A weapon that never tastes blood is no true weapon. A relic that never sees the light of battle is merely a curiosity. Vulkan did not create these items to be locked away. He created them to serve his sons in their eternal struggle against the darkness. This philosophy extends to the way the Salamanders view their own mortality. A warrior who dies in battle, his blood mingling with the soil of a contested world, has fulfilled his purpose no less than an artifact that shatters while striking down a mighty foe. Both have given themselves in service to a cause greater than themselves, and both will be remembered in the annals of the chapter for as long as the Salamanders endure. The Hall of Relics in the fortress monastery of Prometheus serves as both museum and shrine, housing not only the recovered artifacts but also the honoured remains of heroes past. Here can be found the reliquaries made from the leg bones that brother Amadeus lost in battle, waiting to be reunited with his sarcophagus when the mighty dreadnought finally falls. Here are shrines to Xavier, Caesare and ancient Tekel, chambered in anterooms or deep alcoves recessed into the black marble rock. Artifacts too precious to be burned, too venerated to be bequeathed, rest within them along with purity seals, medals, and other tributes to their legacies. Warriors come to the Hall of Relics to pay their respects, to draw inspiration from those who came before, and to remind themselves of the weight of the legacy they carry. Sergeant tsu'gan, tormented by guilt over Captain Kadai's death, walked these halls in the depths of night, seeking some measure of peace among the memories of the honored dead. He passed the shrines, the reliquaries, the silent testaments to centuries of sacrifice, and found himself standing before the place where Kadai's thunderhammer now rested, unclaimed by the new captain who did not feel worthy to wield it. Such moments of reflection are common among the Salamanders, for they are a chapter that values its past as much as its present. The artifacts they seek are not merely objects of power, but links in a chain that stretches back to the founding of the Legion, connections to a time when Vulkan himself walked among his sons and taught them the ways of the forge and the flame. And so the quest continues, generation after generation, as Forge Fathers venture forth into the darkness and the Masters consult the Tome of Fire for guidance. 4 artifacts remain to be found, 4 pieces of Vulkan's legacy waiting to be recovered and returned to Nocturne. What powers they possess, what secrets they might unlock, none can say with certainty. The Tome of Fire offers only riddles and hints, tantalizing glimpses of treasures that could change the fate of the chapter forever. Some believe that one of the lost artifacts is a key of some kind, a device that will unlock the final mystery of Vulkan's fate and reveal what truly happened to the Primarch after Istvan. Others speculate about weapons of devastating power, tools that could turn the tide of the Imperium's endless wars. Still others wonder if the remaining artifacts might be something entirely unexpected, items whose purpose cannot even be guessed at until they are finally held in Salamander hands. Whatever the truth may be, the quest for Vulkan's artifacts embodies everything the Salamanders stand for: patience in the face of impossible odds, faith that their Primarch's wisdom will guide them true, and the certainty that their struggle has meaning beyond the mere winning of battles. They are not just warriors, they are seekers, guardians of a legacy that spans 10,000 years and reaches forward into a future that remains unwritten. The Tome of Fire speaks of a time when all 9 artifacts will be united, when the full inheritance of Vulkan will be gathered in one place for the first time since the heresy. What will happen in that moment is unclear, but the passages suggest it will mark a new beginning for the Salamanders, a transformation as profound as anything they have experienced in their long history. Some interpret this as a literal promise of Vulkan's return, the Primarch emerging from whatever realm has held him to lead his sons once more. Others see it as a metaphor, a symbol of the chapter reaching its full potential and becoming everything Vulkan intended it to be. The debate continues in the halls of Prometheus, as it has for centuries, and will likely continue until the day the final artifact is found and the truth is revealed at last. Until that day comes, the Salamanders will continue their sacred duty. They will fight the enemies of mankind across the galaxy, protect the innocent with their lives, and honor the legacy of their Primarch in everything they do. They will consult the Tome of Fire and follow its guidance, trusting that Vulkan's wisdom will lead them where they need to go. And they will never stop searching for the lost artifacts, never abandon the quest that defines them as a chapter. For they are the sons of Vulkan, forged in fire and tempered by adversity. They carry the flame of their Primarch in their hearts, and that flame will never be extinguished as long as even one salamander draws breath. The artifacts are more than relics, they are pieces of that flame, scattered across the galaxy by Vulkan himself, waiting to be gathered back into the sacred fire from which they came. Into the fires of battle, do the salamanders go. Unto the anvil of war are they forged, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the lost artifacts of Vulkan wait to be found, their secrets intact, their power undiminished by the passage of millennia. The quest continues, the fire burns on, and the salamanders endure.